Morning, everyone. Welcome to another lockdown lesson. This morning's lesson, or this week's series, in fact, introducing this week's series. This week's series is going to be about interacting opposites. And obviously, I used the image of the yin-yang symbol, and that has some relevance to my other practices in terms of Qigong and Tai Chi. But this week I'm going to be kind of focusing more to do with the relationships in the body and opposites or opposite relationships in the body. So what I did this week, I was a little bit prepared. I had a bit of planning time. There's a list of the lessons up in my community group this week, Monday through to Friday. So you can go there and have a look. And if there are particular lessons that are interesting to you, or you want to find out more about them, then you can join me on those days. I think what I'm going to do going forwards is operate as a series in a week, and then have a break. So a week on and a week off, and the break giving me time to obviously let everyone digest the previous week's lesson, and also give me time to prepare next week's lesson. So I think that's a more sustainable teaching model for me in this format. Hopefully someone did give me feedback about that they don't necessarily feel that they can always watch all of them, and that they feel some sense of pressure in relation to not being able to catch all of them, and then can they jump in at any point. So what I'm kind of thinking is that I'll just do it like that in little pockets. And then it gives you guys a chance to engage with the lessons at your own pace, digest them, and also give me feedback as well, and let me know how things were from the previous week and what you've noticed in that 2-week period. So with all of that said, welcome to another day's lesson. Hope you all had a nice weekend. And today's lesson is going to be exploring the relationship between the top of our spine and the bottom of our spine, and how those two areas interact in our body. So if, and I don't know if this is going to come out well on paper, but you can see the spine. I've got a reflection on it. Okay. So you can see at the bottom here. This is what is called the tailbone, and that's what we're going to begin exploring, and then we will look at the relationship at the top of the head as well. So when you're ready, what I'd like you to do is come to a comfortable sitting position. Hopefully your feet are on the floor. See if you can have your feet connected to the floor. And just notice how you're sitting in this moment. This relationship with sitting is something that you've been developing, I assume, throughout this whole lockdown period. So would you say that you're sitting more comfortably as a result of lockdown, or less comfortably? Or just the whole period where we're kind of, having to restrict our movement? Would you say that your sitting has improved during that time, or you're sitting less comfortably now than you were at the beginning of that period? And that should show you, in terms of the learning process involved in sitting, how much you've been active in the learning process, how much you've been passive in the learning process. So once you've found a comfortable sitting position, what I'd like you to do is just to close your eyes and just imagine the long chain of the spine within you. So you could think down from the base of the skull all the way down the spine. Hi, Simone. Good, I'm glad. So yeah, just take a moment to feel down through yourself and feel, any internal awareness you have of your spine. And I'm not talking about individual vertebrae. I'm not asking you to be very specific in your attention, but just to get some sense or some awareness of this skeletal structure that runs through the middle of you, more towards the back of the body, and the general shape of it. So you can see behind me the skeleton. He's got this nice curve. Can you feel that nice curve in yourself? Hopefully it feels nice. And then as you follow your attention down your spine and you come towards the area of your pelvis, the spine kind of joins in with the sacrum, which is this like bony structure in the middle of the pelvis. I wonder if I have an image for that. Not a great one. You can just about see it in this image. So here is the sacrum. I don't know if that's a particularly good image. Anyway. So the spine comes down and it joins in with the pelvis. In the middle of the pelvis is this sort of triangle-shaped bone or arrow-shaped bone called the sacrum. And at the tip of the sacrum is the tailbone. And this is the area that we sometimes hurt if we fall badly. If you've ever been ice skating and you've fallen on your tailbone, you will know what it is. It's obviously in our evolutionary past what we would consider the heritage of the tail. So we have, kind of got rid of the necessity of the tail in our evolutionary history, but the remnants of it are still there. So as you kind of pay attention and you bring your attention down through your spine into the middle of the pelvis, the sacrum, and then see if you can feel where your tailbone is. If you want, you can use your hand and you can have a finger and you can find your tailbone with your finger. Just to kind of build a sense of awareness of that area or that place in yourself. Good. And if you think of that place as you've got your eyes closed, if you think of that place like your tail, can you feel what direction your tail is pointing? If you imagine that you've got a long, luxurious tail coming off your tailbone, what direction would it be pointing? Would it be tucked underneath you? Would it be pointing out backwards, kind of in an excited fashion? Would it be slightly over to the left or slightly over to the right? If you think of our kind of examples that we have in terms of tails in our day-to-day lives, if you've ever seen a dog that's scared and you've ever seen a dog that's excited, you should have been able to discern a difference in their tail position. One is up and wagging, and the other is tucked underneath. Good. So feel how your tailbone is, and then very gently, what I'd like you to do is start taking the tailbone into movement. So what I want you to do is imagine that the tailbone is kind of coming backwards. And what you need to do that is you need to rock, to rock forward in your pelvis. So as you rock forward in your pelvis, the tailbone tilts very slightly backwards. And then just come back to a neutral position in the middle, and then do that again. Tilt the pelvis very gently forwards, and see if you can think about the tailbone and the direction that the tailbone is moving. So that's the thing that you're tracking with your attention. Good. Just do it a few times. Notice as you make that movement, as you tilt your pelvis forwards, maybe you feel that movement in other areas of your body. So for example, maybe you feel that that movement in your spine, or in your lower back, or you feel it further up the body. So just feel for yourself as you do the movement a few times, taking the pelvis slightly forwards, feeling the tailbone as it tilts and kind of points backwards. Good. And then just do that a few times. And maybe you can think about your tail like a long, luxurious tail again. And you could imagine it kind of swishing out behind you and then coming back to the middle, kind of more neutral point. coming backwards, and then coming forwards. Good. And then what I'd like you to do is imagine tucking the tailbone underneath. So tucking the tailbone underneath involves rocking the pelvis slightly backwards and then come back to the middle position. So again, keep your attention, keep your mind's eye resting on the tailbone and the direction and the trajectory of the movement of the tailbone. Take your pelvis slightly backwards and feel if you can tilt the tailbone underneath, like you feel like you're tucking your tail. And just do that a few times. Come back to a middle position and tuck the tailbone underneath, just kind of very gently. And notice as you tuck your tailbone underneath, what happens to the height of your head? Does the height of your head change? Do you get slightly shorter in terms of position? You should be able to see it on the camera. My relationship with the height of the window, as I tilt my pelvis very slightly backwards, I tuck my tailbone underneath, my head comes away from the height of the window. As I come back to a more middle position, it goes towards it. So see if you can feel that for yourself, that relationship between as you tilt your pelvis backwards, you tuck your tailbone underneath, that in some way you get slightly shorter. Good. If you want, a few times, take your head and let your head look down towards your abdomen as you do it. And just feel that it's in some way the whole spine is kind of creating this curved shape. Once you've done it a few times, taking the head down, bring the head back to a kind of more middle position, have the eyes focused on the horizon, and do the movement again and see that even though your head is not looking down, there's still a difference in the height of your head. Your height of your head still changes as you tuck your tailbone underneath. Good. All right, take a little rest. I forgot to say to people if they want to write in the comments to say hi, let me know who you are, where you're watching from. Thank you, Simone, for commenting on the weekly pacing. That's useful to me. Good. So take a little rest, just feel yourself in sitting, feel how comfortably you're sitting now after that. Either that movement is, or those two movements are familiar to you and you feel very comfortable, natural afterwards, or maybe they are less familiar. And after doing a few movements like that, you're a little bit disturbed internally. You've got a sense that, oh, that's unfamiliar and it's changed something in my relationship with myself, and therefore I feel a bit differently afterwards. So which one is it for you? Good. Okay, so come back to tilting the pelvis backwards. Come back to tilting the pelvis, opposite. Come back to tilting the pelvis forwards and taking the tailbone out behind you. Taking the tailbone out behind you. And notice, do you get taller as you do that? As you tilt your pelvis slightly forwards and you take your tailbone behind you, kind of sticking out towards the back of the body, does that make you get slightly taller? And then as you tuck the tailbone, if you follow the whole movement, tuck the tailbone underneath, does that make you get slightly shorter? And just go between those two. And again, hi Marion from Mauritius, that's cool. Thanks for watching. So again, if you can keep your eyes on the horizon, that's a really kind of nice way to measure that as you change the relationship of your tailbone, tucking it underneath and then sticking it out, does the height of your head change? Good. And as you do that, feel into your lower back and the spine in your lower back, and that there's a forwards and backwards movement in the spine. And can you feel that comfortably? Is any part of the movement kind of uncomfortable or difficult? If it is, go slower during that period or do less. Or even if it's really uncomfortable, you could do it in your imagination. just in your imagination, imagining that the tailbone is pointing forwards, tucking underneath, and then pointing backwards and sticking out. And that in some way that will instigate or initiate a movement in the spine that's very subtle. Good. Okay, now what I want you to do is notice as you tilt your pelvis forwards, that you could actually actively take your head up towards the ceiling. Okay, so you're making yourself a little taller, kind of having an active growing force through the head. And then as you tilt your pelvis, you can feel that that drops down and you let your head kind of rest into your spine. Coming forwards, feeling this kind of like upwards force expanding through the spine, kind of pushing the head upwards in some way. But it's kind of making this length through the spine. And then as you tilt the tailbone underneath, allow the head to relax, allow the head to rest into the spine, into the structure of the spine. Good. Okay, so take a little rest. So that's hopefully giving you some sense of the relationship between the head and the pelvis, or the movement of the tailbone and the top of the body. So now what I want to do is think about the atlas at the top of the head. So obviously the spine comes up and it supports the skull, but the way that the spine supports the skull is that the top vertebra, the atlas, the skull is literally resting on that. So it's resting on that very top vertebra. And I don't think I have a good image of it. No. So just as you sit there, very gently tilt your head a little backwards. Tilt your head a little backwards. And just imagine the spine as you do that. So feel into the spine. If you want, you could have your hands kind of connected into the area of the spine and the neck. And just feel as you tilt your head backwards, the head is moving independently of the spine. The head is moving as a separate entity. It's moving on top of the spine. Good. And then as you tilt the head forwards, you feel the same thing. Can you keep your spine in the middle, a sense of uprightness through the spine, and tilt your head slightly backwards and tilt your head slightly forwards? But keep the sense of the kind of, it's a tricky idea, but it's almost like your spine is staying oriented to the horizon. Your spine is staying oriented to the horizon, and you're tilting your head a little backwards and a little forwards. Just very gently. And notice as you tilt your head a little backwards and a little forwards, is there any influence on your tailbone? Does your tailbone want to come into different organizations, even with a very slight tilting of the head? Can you feel it? Can you feel some inclination to become slightly taller at some part of that movement and slightly shorter at some part of that movement? And this is very subtle. Good. So what I want you to do is as you tilt your tailbone underneath now, so we're going to go back to that movement, tilt the tailbone underneath, just very gently keep the spine upright, that sense of the spine being oriented to the horizon, but let the head tilt slightly down. As you tilt the pelvis back, the tailbone tucks underneath, let the head tilt slightly down. And then as you roll forwards, letting the tailbone come out, stick out behind you, just very gently allow the top of the head to tilt a little backwards. And just see if you can feel that relationship between the top of the head, or the head movement, and the tailbone movement. The spine, the top of the spine is staying organized. It's just the head moving on top of it. So it's a very small movement. If you go too far forwards, then you're taking in the spine into flexion or into extension. That's not what I want. I want you to keep the spine kind of in this sort of organized, oriented to the horizon position, and then just very gently tilt the head as you do the movement of your pelvis. Good. Okay, so now we're going to do something interesting. We're going to change the relationship a little bit. So as you tilt the pelvis backwards and you tuck the tailbone underneath, tilt the pelvis backwards, tuck the tailbone underneath, very gently tilt the head backwards. Tilt the head backwards. So you feel that kind of like difference between those two. And then as you tilt the pelvis forwards and you kind of stick the tailbone out behind you, very gently tilt the head forwards. And see if you can organize those two movements. Tilting the pelvis backwards, the tailbone sticks underneath or tucks underneath. At that point, you very gently tilt the head backwards, keeping the spine organized. As you rock the pelvis forwards, tilt the head slightly forwards. And just feel that relationship between the top of your body and the bottom of your body, or the bottom of your torso. Good. And feel the trajectory of your tailbone as well. Does your tailbone go kind of directly backwards and forwards? Does it veer off to different directions? And does that influence in some way the tilting of the head? Okay, so now go back, take a little pause, a moment's pause. Go back to the movement where you're taking the pelvis backwards, the tailbone is tucking underneath, and the head is tilted slightly forward. So this is the first organization that we did. And just see if anything's changed in terms of your sense of coordination with that movement from doing the opposite coordination. Again, the whole time you imagine that your spine is kind of coming upwards and towards the ceiling. It's just the head that's tilting on top of the spine. Good. And notice the change in height as you tilt the pelvis very gently forwards and you tilt the head a little backwards. Do you feel taller? And as you tilt the pelvis backwards, tuck the tailbone underneath. Let the head tilt slightly forwards. Do you feel slightly shorter? See if you can kind of get a sense as you're doing this movement now, what the spine is doing the whole time you're doing that movement. So bring your attention back to the spine. Keep the movement of the head in the pelvis going, or the head in the tailbone. And feel the kind of lengthening and shortening in the spine. Good, and take a rest. And just feel how your head is now resting. As you sit there and you rest, feel how your head is resting on your spine. Is there some sense of the kind of the whole spine being a part of the organization of the head, rather than just the neck, or just the neck and the shoulders, for example? But in some way, a small change in the organization of your tailbone deeply affects the relationship of your head, or your position of your head. Okay, so very gently, just go back to the first movement we did, taking the tailbone a little backwards and a little forwards, and just let the head be passive, let it follow along. And see if we can kind of get a clear line with the tailbone, tucking it forwards. Imagine your luxurious tail swishing out behind you, and then tucking underneath, swishing out behind you and tucking underneath. Yeah. Yeah, and you know, you notice if you do the pelvic clock that there is a relationship with the head, and there's some lessons that you involve the head and the pelvis in the clock movements. So yeah, it's very similar. One of the things that I think is different is that you're utilizing gravity in some way. So in sitting, we've got this sort of, you know, organization, natural organization of the head through the spine, which is not really there in the same way in lying. Obviously, the head is connected, but it's not resting on the spine. You don't have that sense of kind of gravity and connection. Good. So just notice how you're sitting now. Has anything changed in the way that you're sitting? Do you feel more upright? Do you feel more in the middle? There's another way of playing with this organization where you can feel that actually as you go forwards and your spine gets longer, if you continue to go forwards, you can actually feel that it gets shorter again. And then as you go backwards, it gets shorter. As you go forwards and fully into the forwards extension, it actually gets shorter again. And then you can find, like, where is the highest point? Where do I feel the most length in my spine? Where is kind of the middle of this movement of flexion and extension that my spine feels longest? And maybe that's something to think about. If you want, you can try the lesson again and incorporate that idea. We have to finish now, and I'm going to move on to different subjects this week. But if you're interested in this particular subject, maybe I could teach a full Feldenkrais lesson on this and involve some lying down movements as well. So let me know. Cool. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you feel that you're sitting nicely now and you feel kind of active and ready for the day. Tomorrow's lesson is going to be a breathing lesson. I'm going to be looking at the relationship between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. That's a trendy topic in some way, but I want to keep it really simple and basic and practical, so that it doesn't get too fluffy. My aim with these things is to keep it very simple and very practical. So if you're interested in that subject, that's what I'll teach tomorrow. Great. Okay, so thank you for watching. I'll be back at 11 tomorrow morning. If you want to join my regular Feldenkrais class, which is an hour-long lesson, that's on Monday evenings, which is tonight. If you want to rewatch the lessons, you can go into my Thoughtful Movements community group or watch on YouTube. If you'd like to make a donation to me, you can do so via the PayPal link in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you back here tomorrow. All right, take care. Bye.